Welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerdarchists Dave.
I'm Nerdarchists Ted, and tonight we're digging into the bones of your world, its legends, its lies, and the truths that spark entire campaigns.
From whispered origin stories to apocalyptic prophecy topic, our first setting, in Aether Skies, civilization clings to the sky aboard floating cities powered by volatile ether, while horrors fester below. A cold war simmers above the clouds, but it is the myths, forgotten gods, cursed technology, and prophetic skyfall that truly shape the world's fate. Hey, check out the description below where you can find links to our first ever Aether Skies campaign, as well as our D&D game where we play Aether Skies, The Sky Remembers, in the description.
Myths in Aether Skies are treated like viruses, dangerous ideas that can infect a mind, a ship, or a city. The return of the 13th city, Haven, has reignited cults, conspiracy, and skyborne doomsday prophecies. The Aethernati suppress certain truths as acts of national security. Meanwhile, the Knights of the Anti-Ether spread word that the fall of the gods was no accident. It was a warning.
So the Mourning Hawk is an experimental Aether ship that is from our very first campaign together. And you guys came up with the name for it. Mourning spelled not as in the thing that happens at dawn, but spelled in the way you mourn something, as in sadness. But yes, that ship has become a myth and a legend in Aether Skies, even though it's a bit newer compared to the rest of the history of the setting and the campaign. It's come up several times. There's been a second prototype that's been created around it. And so these ships look a bit different than what people are used to seeing. And so when they are spotted, it is going to start create these myths and legends, but also these are things that were used and wielded by heroes and also villains later on, has been incorporated even more so into the lore of the world. Because I believe even now on our current campaign, legends are being born, and the Mourning Hawk, as well as the Dark Harlot, are going to have a part to play.
Now, this is one of those things that if you got a game or a gaming group and you play with the same players and you're going to stay in the same setting, it can be a lot of fun to just kind of advance the time of the world a little bit forward. And the events of the campaign that you ran last or 2 times ago has now influenced what is going on. And to harken back to, oh, let's bring back these characters or something that they did and have it be a part of the plot can be an awful lot of fun. It's even more devastating when it's something like what Dave did with the first Aether Skies game, where we ended, and spoiler alert if you are just hearing about this game and haven't gone and watched it, it did not have shiny, happy endings and everybody gets to narrate their characters out of the story like we've done in some games. This was one that had a bit of a twist to it, and some of those characters have indeed come back into subsequent stories to see what happens. My character and Robin's character came back as essentially villains in Dave's D&D in a Castle game, and there's now even like rumors of Robin's character resurfacing in some aspect into the game that he's currently running on Tuesdays. And like those things just become super awesome, not only for the players, and that's what you would normally get, but in this particular situation, any of the viewers at home that have watched the old game and are watching the current game, that's like an awesome spoiler and breadcrumb back to that original game. I love that stuff.
Yeah, and underlying principles and points here are real simple. Like Ted said, if you're running multiple campaigns with the same players, being able to take some of that stuff from those previous games and make it your myths, your legends, your lore in the current game. And especially if you do it in a way where you're kind of like slow revealing it, letting it being discovered through play and not just dumping it on your players, but like, look, here's all this cool stuff I came up with from what you guys did last, but let it actually unfurl and unravel slowly. And more importantly, make it feel like they're the ones finding the information and bringing it to light. It's going to be so much more impactful. And I think they're going to really enjoy it a lot. I think my players have been really enjoying those aspects that are coming out from the previous games that even if their characters don't know, it's like these little Easter eggs that the players are finding. They kind of like help suck them deeper into the world, the lore of the things that you've created, and it gives them ownership.
It doesn't have to be the major game ending type situation. It could be something small. Here's a prime example of something that I've yet to do, but I definitely have the inklings of where I'm going to put it in. In Dave's Griffin Gaff game, I played a cleric. And at one point in time, we basically touched on a thread of my character learning deep speech. And there was very much the possibility of my character taking levels in Warlock and some stuff going on. But like, I wound up like fighting against that kind of stuff. And it never wound up going to any kind of like end game situation. But what did happen is I created extra copies of my ritual book, because it was like at the time only like 5,000 gold to make a book that had every single ritual spell available at the time. I'm like, I'm just going to make 2 full copies just in case something happens to this one that I've got a backup. And you're like, okay, go ahead and make this save, which should have been no problem for my character, but I failed. So Dave was like, okay. And he made a mental note. So there's 2 copies of books that are laden with all of this potent amount of magic that are woven in with some eldritch entities, magic, and possibly sentience that now just exist within this world. So I was
And
like, well, I
so,
wonder what. Go ahead.
just real quick, like that theme actually fits really good with the Aether Skies campaign setting, even though that was Ulfgania. And it's not just that your character learned deep speech. Your character learned, it's a thing in Kobold Press, dark speech. And dark speech is actually almost like a form of spellcasting. It's your words have power, and as the name implies, it's dark and it's evil. And that's what the saving throw was for you, whether or not you laced it into that other book or not subconsciously,
So
which
I
no, and
just
I
felt like,
know, but Relian did not know.
yeah, the character itself has no clue what he did. He just assumed I did it all correctly, but subconsciously there's layers of extra magic that's imbued in the book and this connection to this dark entity that anybody that starts playing around with those spells in those books is gonna have to deal with whatever those consequences might be. And like that's an idea of just looking at something that could be small that a player character does that you're like, okay, this affected the world in a greater effect than the character and maybe even the player thought. I should revisit this at a later time. Now, in this particular instance, Dave and I both ran games out of Volcania at the same time. I'm still running a game under with my kids in the same setting, same continent. So it's very easy for over these 50 to 100 years, whatever it's been since Relian's retired, for this book to have somehow moved of its own accord to where it might be found by others, whether it's with a villain or whether it's a dragon's horde. You can definitely find a way to, okay, this wants to be discovered so that this entity can get back out there. But taking that to your game, something small, something that could easily be more important than their understanding, have that revisited in a later game. It can be so much more meaningful, so much more fun for everyone involved. All right, so the ground was claimed. The surface wasn't abandoned, it was claimed by something else, and those who escaped were banished, not spared.
So in Other Skies, the premise is you live in one of the 12, now 13 flying cities, right? The people fled the surface a long time ago, and there's all kinds of myths and legends around why they left, but nothing is really concrete. No one knows for sure. And some people say it's all a conspiracy, and actually the surface is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. The others in the games we played were saying, you know what? Actually, the governments know, but they're keeping it a secret. There's all of these conjecture around these myths and legends. And I personally I kind of like the idea of not always answering the question and solving the problem. We had talked about this in one of our other in many of our other videos as well. But like these open-ended questions, you could do that with your myths and your legends. And it also gives you room to kind of let them breathe and decide which direction you want to go in based on the players you're playing with. As a matter of fact, if you're playing in your same world and you're running multiple campaigns, whether they're one after another or at the same time, there's no reason why the answers have to be the same for all of them. You know, you can change it up. You can have a variance, whether it's because you want to call them alternate dimensions or versions of your world, or maybe there's some other reason why it isn't the same for everyone. And also, just because you learned something doesn't mean what you've learned is true.
That's an aspect of looking at, and when you've got a situation where it's possible to have multiple viewpoints that could be conflicting, that's where myths and legends get to really be fun. And what you can really do is you put out, here's the list of opinions. Find out where the players fall, where the characters fall, because they might not necessarily agree. And whatever seems to be the most enjoyable could wind up being the answer. What is the most surprising could wind up being the answer. This is the great part where RPGs and history have this nice divergence, because history is set, but when you're running RPG games, nothing is set until it's found and finite, until it's like, okay, we need a definitive answer now, so this is what it is. Even when you think you have an answer, it could be a ruse, it could be a misdirection. So you've got the ability to kind of bend and flow as more and more information is uncovered. Look at mystery shows. They're always finding new clues that change the course of the investigation. And who was the original suspect isn't, and it's now this person. Oh, but this other clue puts it back to the first person. So you can have a lot of fun with those kind of perspectives when dealing with these fun myths. So I look at all of this stuff as not only as a way to help shape your world, but to allow the opinions of the players and the characters to help shape the past.
Yeah. So one of the cool things that Keith Baker did when he created the Eberron setting, like they had this key focal point that the setting sets up the setting in a sense that you have the last war, and the thing that ends the last war is this horrific catastrophe that happens to one of the kingdoms called the Day of Mourning, creating the Mournlands. And one of the awesome things Keith does is Pete never says what happens, right? It's always a mystery because he left it so when you play your Eberron campaign, maybe that's something your players discover and find out what happened. But the only way to really find out what happened is to play and for the DM of that particular campaign to figure out what it was and decide. We are talking about these different topics through the lens of our particular settings that we're running and our games that we're running, because we will probably at some point turn them into our own campaign settings. And I think there's some lessons to be taken from that. Sure, we want to spell out as much as possible, but figuring out those key points where you don't answer the question and leave it up to the individual dungeon master to do it. Maybe we have some suggestions, but there's no cold hard. This is what happened because we want you to be able to explore it with your players and kind of like discover it together. They can't just read ahead and find the answer. City seals and forgotten pact. Legends tell of a bargain made of the 12 cities to lock away something beneath the clouds. Havens fall and return broke the seal. The old pact demands payment in.
When we start looking at this particular situation, this is the link to the eldritch entities that exist out in the distant edges of this particular world. They're the looming threat like the Tarrasque. It's out there. It's not necessarily going to show up in the grandest way in every single campaign. It's meant to help guide what the setting is. So when you're looking at your campaign world, what is a grandiose threat that shapes what the world is? With us, eldritch entities can seep into thought, into prophecy, into cults and organizations from both sides, but it stems down to that this is out there without necessarily needing to be in every single game. So if you have an idea of your campaign setting and what fills that niche, it's going to allow you to kind of help build your own myths, your own legends for this world so that you know how to make your world shine and stand out from all the other generic fantasy worlds that are out there.
This was fun because in that first campaign we ran, the players got to piece some of this together, right, and figure it out. And the culmination of that game, where Ted had mentioned, like, it did not have a super happy ending, but they solved the problem, right? And the problem was the deteriorating seals, and they figured out how to reinforce the seals and kind of put them back for a time. It wasn't really a permanent solution, but at the time, it was the best that they had, and it kind of worked for a while. They got to learn more about the world in that process. They got to learn what the purpose for the flying cities were, aside from just refugees for civilization. There was more to it than that. They were actually configured into a magical seal that was broken when the 13th city fell from the sky. And the kind of the symbol of the truly bad things happening is when the city returns and has been corrupted, right? So, which is kind of like the catalyst for that whole campaign, our own kind of day of mourning, if you would. The takeaway is to kind of have these things in your world so that the players can discover them and you can go through them together. I also like the idea of creating almost like incomplete sentences or thoughts when it comes to this kind of stuff, like so that you have an idea and a direction that you want to go, but also leave it open. Give yourself some wiggle room that if things in your campaign change, that you're not locked into it so that you can change. Like, and I know there's some like schools of thought that absolutely hate this, like, to the point where they almost consider it cheating, right? They want everything locked in. It's got to be written out. It's immutable. It can't change. I feel it. Me, Ted, the guys we game with, the folks we game with, gals we game with, have more of a, it doesn't happen until it happens approach. So we tend to be a little bit more loosey-goosey and leave things open because sometimes like more fun and better ideas spring from that.
I've had a number of my games change, fairly hard directional shift because of something a player says. And I'm like, sure, I'm confident in my DM skills. I'm more confident when I get behind that GM screen probably than any other time in my life. And yet I game with so many veterans, so many awesome people and players that there are times that somebody says something, I'm like, man, that is fucking fantastic. And I might not say it out loud, but all of a sudden, note taking is happening, and all of a sudden, there's now a shift, there's now a change, and sometimes it could be, well, this is more evil. The players are into something that is going to be a little bit darker than what I originally had planned. Sometimes it's just a better idea, and like Dave says, there's some people out there who absolutely won't do that. And you know what? That's fine too. I'm not trying to say that just locking in your ideas is the only way to do it, or that's the wrong way to do it. No, that's fine if that's your preferred running style. But being mutable is equally good as a concept, and for us, is better.
Yep, just works at our table.
So your city's myth keepers just declared a legend officially false, but then your crew finds proof it's real. What do? Do you bury the truth, weaponize it, or let it burn the world clean? If you had fun, hit that like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss when we drop another tale from the edge of imagination.
And until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.